welcome to Varn. And today I'm with Dillion from the Untrodden podcast, a podcast that specializes in liberal engagement with left-wing philosophy. Although, as when I say any of this kind of thing, we have to realize that every term, liberal engagement, left-wing, and philosophy are all contested words.
Yeah.
And in that spirit, Dillion, I'm going to ask you, what interested you as a person interested in liberal philosophy and political science to engage with left-wing critics of liberalism and left-wing critics of the left?
Yeah, well, the defining moment for me was definitely the victory of Trump. And, for me, I think the reason that was very confusing to me because I felt like I had these, very strong liberal principles. And it seemed to me like none of the kind of discussion or the awareness of that election was based on those principles. It was all about strategy, various transitory interests of like the Democratic Party strategy. Like, do we need to have different podcasts or all this stuff that I just don't care about at all? Or it was, just like the doomsaying or people switching teams. Like all of a sudden, all the billionaires are big Trump fans. I guess they've been big Trump fans apparently for a very long time, but the biggest Trump fans. And so the whole thing, I just felt like the whole dialogue was just very confusing to me. And I felt like Donald Trump was a substantive, severe threat to liberalism as kind of a system itself. And obviously, liberalism should have like disagreement within it. But to me, it seemed like, and I can go into this at some point if you want, but to me, it seemed like this was a substantively different threat. And so I didn't have answers to what was going on. And I felt like I had to, I don't know, learn more, put myself out there, listen to different types of thought. And at the time, I had already had some I just kind of happened by coincidence to kind of find some dissident, like leftist type online figures. And so I decided to actually listen to more, people like Daniel Tutt, Chris Catrone, actually start listening to some Marxist academic online figures. And I just realized there was this whole world that I didn't understand. And, I had views on leftism for a long time. And a lot of those views have remained the same about those particular kinds of leftists. But what I didn't realize was that the theoretical, more serious like area of the left had something that I had to listen to that I was interested in. And particularly, I felt like the 18th Brumaire by Marx was a text which revealed so much like sort of similarity to the situation where we're in now, where I had to ask myself, is this because there's something about the leftist critiques that I'm hearing that has value? And so, that kind of opened that question up directly for me. And I really wanted to start to like open dialogue with those people that were influencing me and really work through these questions I was asking myself.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, I guess my question to that though. So it's the second election of Donald Trump that is your crisis, not the first. So I guess that's age. As we discussed on your show, I'm like significantly older than you, and I would like to kind of discuss what you think liberalism as a system is, because I think one of the things about the crisis of liberalism, and since Obama, actually, or since the end of the Bush administration, there has been a lot of talk about a crisis of liberalism from both the far left, the center left, even by the end of the Obama administration, and the far and center far right. And my understanding and my experience of this, Bush represented a crisis for liberalism in the GOP, and Obama's failure to have a successor that could transcend Trump won, as well as the left turning further and further away from a détente with the Democratic Party that had existed uneasily for a long time, at least in rhetoric. Although, to complicate that a little bit more, there were actually more left-wing third parties in the 1990s and 1980s than there are, post-Obama. I mean, the Green Party has never gotten the share of the vote that it got when Nader was leading it in the 90s. Since then,
Right.
and even before George W. Bush, George Herbert Rocker Bush was seen as a crisis of liberal conservatism because Ross Perot had split the vote and led to Clinton's victory in 1992. But none of those freak people out the way Trump did. And if you look at you start looking at both left and right wing Trump, you start seeing these critiques of liberalism even making it into the New York Times. So in addition to someone like David Brooks, you had Ross Dunhat, who was kind of the light version of someone like Patrick Vaneen. If you don't know who Patrick Deneen is, he's one of these, crisis of liberalism people that if you don't see what his answer is, it seems like he's almost a left winger.
Right.
And then you read the last 3 chapters of his book on the subject and you realize, no, he's a integralist and a rightist. I ask you this because I think this was missed by a lot of liberals. I think a lot of liberals maybe even understand Trump better as an individual figure than those of us who follow the longue durée terms of liberalism do. I might even, we've talked about that off air, and I might even give you that point.
Yeah.
But I don't think that there's been a deep understanding of the internal crisis of ideology amongst younger liberals. And I guess this leads me to ask you, 1, do you think liberalism is in crisis? And 2, what do you think liberalism is to be in crisis in the first place?
Right. Yeah. I mean, before I address those directly, I would just say that I both agree with you and disagree with you. I completely agree with you that liberals haven't grappled with this question when it should have been at least beginning to be grappled with. That we've just been kind of living in blissful ignorance, and kind of just very very behind the times, unaware. And I think that's a big problem. And that's kind of exactly the problem I was pointing out about liberals that made me interested in leftist critique is that I just felt like they still weren't assessing the situation properly, really. And then, but where I would disagree with you is I do think there's something substantively different about Trump. I do think there's something different about the moment we're in now. I actually don't think that my feeling about this happening with Trump 2 is as much to do with age as it is to do with a substantive difference in the kind of character that Trump was in Trump 2, or had shown himself to be. And so, yeah, I think that's the case. We can get more into that. But just to address your questions, I mean, is there a crisis? I would say, I guess I have to be kind of evasive about that. On one hand, clearly there is a crisis. Clearly. I mean, there's complete incoherence, disarray. I think we're in a moment where liberalism is really, the system is really up for grabs in a way that it hasn't been in maybe 100 years. In the sense that people are really disaffected and don't believe in liberalism anymore. I mean, it's really hard to find it's getting harder and harder to find people who are just like, yeah, I just like liberals and I like capitalism. It's hard to find those people, and it's going to become even harder. And people on all sorts of the spectrum are really rediscovering themselves and starting from scratch and rediscovering that politics can be more than what we've just kind of assumed and taken for granted. So on that level, there must be a crisis. I guess where I would say that there isn't a crisis as much is I think we put liberalism in a position that's kind of untenable, where we expect it to be coherent, or philosophically sound or something like that. When the reality is that no government has ever made sense, right? I mean, no government has ever fulfilled its philosophical tenets. It's always kind of grappling with different incoherent strands. I mean, if we look at like medieval Europe, for example, right, you have a very real Christian character, a Christian core, a grappling with that Christian character, and also a whole lot of not grappling with that and very confused relations. And so on that level, what do I think liberalism is? Well, first of all, liberalism is a complicated tradition. It has different strands within it. It has to. Every tradition is that way. But generally, I think liberalism is really defined by an anti-authoritarian character, and kind of a anti-violence, kind of moderate character, pro-civil discourse, and some level of democracy. But not complete democracy almost ever. I mean, pretty much every liberal is against democracy, pure democracy. I mean, that's just a fact, right? So we're talking about a tradition of republicanism and, you know, things like this, which are really trying to find a sweet spot between all these different factors, right? We really need to have democratic input, but not too much. We need to have stability to prevent violence. I see it as very practical in that way. Um, if you look at like America, particularly the founding fathers, they don't really, they do have a side of them which is very much like partisan radical democracy believers, but at the same time they're very much trying to solve the problem of the state in history. They're trying to figure out how can we make a state that isn't going to kill itself, right? I mean, they really are. Their belief is that the reason to have all these different institutions is not necessarily to have liberty, it's to have stability. And the thought is that the liberty which they cared about so much would come from the stability, but the priority has to be the stability, right? And I mean, this comes back to Trump, because for me, what I like about liberalism is that realistic stability and good governance. I think that's the best thing you can expect from it. The best thing liberalism has going for it is good governance, stability, responsiveness to change, although at varying degrees. And Trump is an anti-liberal in that sense. He doesn't believe in the system. He's proclaimed himself to be outside of the system. I think he's pretty much anti-constitution, in the sense that I think you have to have like a fair election system. That's and it's not just like some like, I don't know, zealous democracy ideal. It's because, like I said, the system is built in such a way that the different aspects of government have to kind of collide with each other. And one of the ways which the Federalist Papers literally discuss doing this is the vote. And the vote has to be a check, and the vote can't be controlled by a branch of government because the branch of government will just do whatever it wants with it, of course. And I think Trump basically tried to do a unilateral executive control over the vote. I think he basically did that, and I think that's anti-liberal. I think that degrades into, some kind of authoritarian system, some kind of anti-liberal system. And I think when you have figures like Trump or Orban who have shown that they don't really care about the parliament or the clashing of institutions and civil society also, that seems anti-liberal to me. And so, yeah, I mean, it is kind of vague and nebulous in some way, but this appreciation for civil society, for institutions, this is really the core of the liberal tradition. I mean, it really seems to me to be the coherent strand. But that is going to have a lot of variance. I mean, you're going to go all the way from hardcore Federalist liberals types who are very much on the edge of that authoritarianism, right? I mean, they're going to be really close. They're going to be up. They're going to be up there, and they're going to be like, we need to do some things that are against your civil rights, for the public good, and they're going to be really veering on the edge of that. On the other edge, you're going to have Confederates, right? And you're going to have people who are like, I want my rights so bad that I should be able to do whatever I want, and we should have no government, and I should just, we should just do whatever we want. Kind of libertarianism, proto-libertarianism. And I think those are both legitimate strands of the liberal tradition. Those are the two ends of it. And I think it might be useful to start with defining it as those two ends. Yeah.
I mean, Jonathan Israel, I consider kind of the preeminent scholar of the historical tradition of liberalism, defines three broad categories, of which Marxism is a deviation out of. Like we come out, so we might call it left liberalism, and I don't mean like what Marxists will call rad lib or shit lib. I mean, right. The almost complete democratic form of liberalism that wanted, it called for mediating institutions, but not many. The Enragés in the French Revolution, and for those of you who don't know your French Revolution categories, that's not the Jacobins. That's people to the left of them. The early socialists, including the Saint-Simonians, the pre-Marxist socialist, the kind of American individualist, both anarchist and not, and that is going to range from the transcendentalist to Lysander Spooner, the American anarchist. They all kind of come out of liberalism. And things that make people uncomfortable is that there are some forms of authoritarianism, including fascism, that have a clear relationship to liberalism. One of the things that makes talking about this hard with someone like Trump and about our difference, you keep on, I mean, we've gone back and forth on this, where I think you keep on impugning that I think Trump is the same thing as like most right-wing figures. And I think Trump is the ultimate combination of contradictions in right liberalism that have existed for a while. And the reason why I think that is Trump is not unique as a quasi-Caesarist or Bonapartist figure as a response to liberalism right now. I'm going to leave China out of it because that's a more complicated scenario. And in some ways, I think they're just not coming out of this tradition at all. Except for that there's some liberalism as a background of Chinese communism, but not a lot. But we can talk about Orban, Berlusconi, in some ways, ironically, Macron, although he's different in that he's almost a Caesarist figure for the preservation of liberalism. Right. So he really is, in my mind, an illiberal liberal. And this tendency towards increased executive authority, which is most pronounced in the US, but is, again, not unique to it. We have had quasi-Trumpist figures emerge in England. We have had quasi-Trumpist figures emerge in all the major European economies and in East Asia. And it's even kind of wrong-headed to call them quasi-Trumpists because some of them come as much as a decade earlier than Trump. So to me, that indicates that there is something going on in this spectrum of liberalism where it no longer can cohere itself. And this has happened before, and the time it's happened before, in my mind, is World War II. That you saw the final defeat of the old aristocratic ancien regimes. I know Marxists like to pretend that they went out during the national revolutions, but if you actually look at the stats, they weren't completely decimated until the end of World War I. Right. And you had a crisis in liberalism economically, and you had a weird hybrid force emerge. The various fascisms, and I actually use plural there on purpose because there's the similarities between Italian fascism, Romanian fascism, and Nazism are they're partial. Nazism is the weirdest of them. But there was an attraction by strong. I mean, we do have to admit that before the late 1930s, a lot of progressive liberals in America kind of like not Nazism, fascism. They did not like Nazism, but they were a little bit more sanguine on Mussolini. Right. And I think that's because there was a similar problem, but in that case, it was purely economic. Today, it's economic and something else. And I actually don't feel comfortable putting down what that something else is. I mean, I would say we have a crisis in social reproduction, and I think that crisis is related to economics, but it's deeper than that. And let me talk about how I would define that. Like kids today aren't dating. They don't really want to have a family. There's the belief in a future at all amongst the generation slightly younger than I think you are is very, very low. It's like world historically low. It's like 50% of people in their late teens don't even really think there's a future to be had. That might be slightly exaggerated. It's not true worldwide, but it's very much true in the English speaking world. And my question is then, why have so many people seen Trumpism with its, I mean, one of the things I think you're dead on about that makes Trumpism illiberal is if we go back to like Max Weber's definition of liberalism, and I think our discussion is going to jump around today on different definitions of liberalism, right? But civil society is a counterbalance to the state because the state is, for Max Weber, a monopoly on violence that you accept for the purposes of stability, because that stability will allow you to have other forms of civil liberty.
Right.
And that if that monopoly on violence starts to break down or becomes too direct, you're going to have a legitimacy crisis. So, I mean, I hate to sound like there's a Goldilocks theory of violence in liberalism, but there kind of is in the early 20th century.
Mm-hmm.
You know, we want to sublimate the violence of the state, make it, you know, rein it in by rules of law, maintain, allow people to have their freedom and social competition, but keep it from going into outright civil war because of the experience of the early 20th century and the 19th century where civil wars were super common. I guess my question to you is, even in the earlier crises of liberalism in the early 20th century and in the middle of the 19th century, there very much seemed like a way out. But there are also very clear alternatives on the table. And in the 19th century, it's the ancien regimes. In the early 20th century, it's fascism and communism. Today, these alternatives to liberalism aren't coming from outside competitor ideologies. They're just not. Like Trump isn't someone who became like this because he became won over to an anti-liberal competing ideology of another state.
Right.
Maybe people argue that with Russia, but I don't see the evidence of it. He seems to be where a certain kind of economic protectionism that can drill. I don't want to call him a populist because I don't actually think he is. I think that's actually a misunderstanding. Can push himself into the public as a demagogue for all these conflicting tendencies, but then really do it for. I mean, one thing I would agree with you is there is a substantive difference between Trump 1 and Trump 2, and where a lot of us, like Danny Besner, definitely Chris Catrone, myself, were perhaps too soft, is we assumed that while there might be a difference between Trump 2 and Trump 1, it would not be as thick as it obviously was. Now, some of those people are still maintaining that. For me, within the first week, I knew I was wrong. That we were not going back to Trump 1. That the countervailing institutions of governmental liberalism that kept him in check have been weakened somehow. But the question is, how did they get weakened when the Democratic Party was in charge after Trump? I mean, these are like, I guess this is both a philosophical question and a practical question for you as far as your opinion on it. Like, why is someone like Trump more feasible now? Because I couldn't imagine him even in the in the worst of the Bush years, and we'll admit that George W. Bush era Patriot Act powers are what is enabling Trump mixed with some old powers given to FDR actually to do what he's doing now. Insofar that there's any legal pretense for it, of which there's not a ton. I mean, there's some ways in which this government is, by its own standards, somewhat lawless. Um,
Yeah, I mean, I I would say a few things. So I think one, I do think it's a legitimate problem that I have to take up, and it's why I was so interested in the 18th Brumaire and leftism broadly. Really, is this question of how is Trump possible, and what is this tendency in liberalism? Because I do think I would actually say not only is Trump kind of reflective of a deeper problem, at the same time, this is a very old problem. I mean, just earlier I was reading Samuel Johnston and Hume,
mhm,
from like mid 18th century England, and they both commented on Robert Walpole, who was like, you know, big Whig liberal quote unquote guy who was very controversial because he very much did. My understanding is he consolidated the state in a lot of ways. He was pretty controversial. He was a little corrupt, and so he was this kind of figure. And you know, what's interesting is that Samuel Johnson is maybe a more progressive type liberal, and Hume is what I would consider to be a very conservative liberal. I think they're both liberals. They both kind of oppose him because this tension that we're talking about right now between this kind of, you know, this authority and this desire to get things done, and this feeling of just ultra liberty in contrast to that, these like two poles. I mean, these were contesting each other blatantly. I mean, hundreds of years ago in England. I mean, this is a very real tension that liberalism has never really like resolved or solved or something. I mean, this is just a real thing that we have to deal with. And I think the American system, I guess, is vulnerable to that, um, and it has been vulnerable to that. I mean, all you have to do is look at, you know, the Civil War to see a time when the American system was completely shifting. And I would say the Civil War is really the Federalists winning. It's because I think some people will say that the way that the country changed in the Civil War made it fundamentally different, like it was anti-constitutional. And I would say there was two sides, and ironically or not ironically at all, there was this hardcore liberty faction and there was this federalist faction, and their differences were never resolved. I mean, they had to kind of they met in the middle with, you know, the Bill of Rights, and they met in the middle, and ultimately with the Civil War is one of those factions getting a win, a really big win, and consolidating more towards the federalist angle. And so in that sense, this is a long time coming. I mean, ever since we can trace it all the way back to the Civil War,
mhm,
that there's really that opposition between a discontent who, and a lot of people will trace Trumpism back to the Confederacy, and they'll do it on kind of like a racial politics angle or whatever. But I do think it's legitimate in the sense that there's this radical liberal libertarian belief that the state needs to get out of my country and I need to have local politicians or whatever. And that's a very contradictory belief itself, against this winning, triumphing federalism that you can see obviously in FDR, like you said. And so in that sense, I think you are right to point out that Trump isn't that crazy when looking at it from that perspective. And I I don't really have an answer for that. That's kind of my main problem. My only answer would be that I think this problem needs to be dealt with honestly. And we need
mhm,
to be honest that when we're looking at those two liberal strains, I kind of have my preference, but ultimately they're both legitimate, which also means they're both illegitimate. That neither one of them really has a claim to the true liberalism. Liberalism is kind of incoherent, and we need a genuine philosophical grappling with what liberalism is, what it ought to be. And I think that's what the moment really requires is honestly a full philosophical, you know, thoughtful undertaking of what we're doing. I think people have essentially the, the one faction won over the other, and the two factions kind of existed in discontent and frustrated coexistence. And I think it's kind of a naive liberal lack of historical appreciation that we never dealt with these problems. And so I think it's really a long time coming, kind of an inevitable crisis. And that's what I would really say. It's an inevitable crisis that these factions are going to come to fight each other. It's inevitable in any system. Any government in history, human history, has had to deal with these things. And so what we need is, yeah, we need to reckon with what liberalism is. I have some ideas of what I think is good about liberalism, and we also need to reckon with the critiques of liberalism. And that's why, again, why I'm here, why I'm talking to leftists is, you know, I think we have to deal with that. And unfortunately, I think the problem with our political situation is it's kind of pre-political, it's kind of anti-political. And you're kind
mhm,
of hinting at that when you talk about how younger generations are just kind of hopeless. There isn't a lot of genuine grappling with these problems. There just isn't, right? I mean, you have people who are like coping and want to just hold on to the dream for as long as possible, the Democrats. You've got people who have kind of like incoherent ideas about how to demolish liberalism. You've got Trump, who I think has mostly personal interests. I don't think he's ideological at all. Of course, yeah, I
Agreed.
agree with you. But there are ideological people around Trump who want to take advantage of the moment and go in a completely different direction. And so I guess my doomer take would be that things are really so deeply incoherent that the only path forward has to be kind of an honest acknowledgement of that, rather than just kind of like putting your partisan flag in like a particular faction in that incoherence, rather saying this is all incoherent. What does make sense? What can we figure out? And that, I think that's going to have to make strange alliances. I think people who haven't worked together before are going to have to see eye to eye, and they're going to have to forge alliances on different grounds. And I don't think people are in any respect ready to do that. But we really have to move past the new left and the progressives and the neocons and the neoliberals and all these factions. We really have to move past them and grapple with what the moment we're in.
One of the things about that, I here's one of the things that I would agree with you. If you looked at MSNBC, I'm gonna take that as like the standard bearer of left liberalism, even though it's not even MSNBC. What is it, MS Now?
I think so. Yeah, I don't even know. Yeah.
Yeah, and it was, while there were a few Jacobin adjacent Democratic socialists who smell of Marxism, kind of,
yeah,
who can get on there. Marxists are still not generally on there. If the left liberal source where you will occasionally find Marxist is going to be Pacifica Radio and maybe Democracy Now, and that's very rare even there. Which is interesting if you were to like deal with what you see online, where Marxism is a dominant trend in, we're no more than at most 3 to 5% of the population at best. That's at me best, being wildly optimistic.
Yeah.
But online we actually are a discourse that you actually have to reckon with, whereas in progressive media you don't. But progressive media has shifted pretty dramatically in the last year alone. Yeah. So, for example, I mean, in this way, both admits that there's something to your thing about the breakdown of these old factions, but also problematizes it, because it means that while there's a breakdown of these old factions, people may be cooperating for now, but they're also trying to seize the reins of what, the left's end of liberalism is going to be in the future. And the one thing you may complain about Marxism is like increasingly we're opting out. We're just like, you guys go do your own shit. We're tired of dealing with you.
Yeah.
And who's come in? Former neocons are all over the place in MSNBC world.
Right.
And I find that interesting. And a lot of people will just say they're being unprincipled. They might be, they might not be. I actually have a hard time telling, because they also seem to not be as self-censoring as like standard centrist Democrats are on certain things.
Yeah.
I mean, frankly, they were more willing to call Trump fascist than a lot of leftists were. Like,
exactly.
And so I find this moment really odd, because on one hand you have that, on the other hand, and I had a Christian Duganist on my show where I cover right-wing topics, and occasionally, I've only done it once, but I want to start doing it more. I'll interview a right-winger who's willing to like take some criticism and actually kind of get a feel for what they're actually thinking, if they're not going to threaten to put me in a camp or something. Right. And he told me that one of the interesting things about Trumpism was that it pulls from dissidents of the left. And I was like, well, that's interesting, because I actually never thought, RFK Jr. or Tulsi Gabbard was on my side. I thought they were kind of bizarro, crankish left liberals. But also I started looking at some of these things, some of these just sociological studies that I don't think a lot of leftists have dealt with. And one of the things you have to deal with now is Trump has sorted parties in ways that are temperamentally conservative, but not ideologically conservative. So one of the things I'll say about that is like, medical conspiracism when I was coming up, in my 20s, was actually more common on the left than the right. You did encounter it on the religious right a good bit, particularly around like the LDS, but it was not a default position at all. And you would easily find anti-vaxxers on the left. There were plenty of them. And today, that's sorted. That's almost completely sorted out. Another thing, authoritarianism, as a personality trait, not as a thought-out ideology. The Democrats and Republicans actually are pretty evenly divided on authoritarians because they always make up about 10 to 20% of any given population everywhere. Sure. They don't actually normally correspond to a singular ideology, despite what liberals would want. There's been plenty of leftists and liberals who have authoritarian tendencies. Maybe even myself included. And what I've seen is that is increasingly sorted out by political party for the first time. So it's not just that the ideologies are sorted out, because I'm not, you want to talk about a crisis of ideology. I don't know what the GOP ideology post-liberalism actually even is. I got no idea. Because even things that people associate together, like national conservatism and white nationalism, those are actually kind of at odds, as is tealist accelerationism. I mean, he's hyper right wing, but he thinks the white nationalists are too soft on the weaknesses of white people, and so there's Nick Land. The various, Trumpism at first was a more secular movement, but it sorted the religious out pretty hard, and now there's this quasi dominionist wing of Trumpism that's pretty strong, that existed a little bit in the first Trump term, but it's really strong now. But that Trump himself doesn't seem to actually give a shit about. So one of the things that ironically, we're talking about the incoherence of liberalism as an idea set, but one of the things that may be happening is the coalitions are actually cohering in types, except that other than marginal identity, I don't know what the Democrats coalitions based off of anymore.
I think it's related to that phenomenon you mentioned about old neocons, like these ex-Republicans frequenting CNN and MSNBC. I mean, that's what the Democrats represent. The Democrats represent a return to moderation and stability and kind of this blissful ignorance, which to a large degree I was in favor of, but I do think we have to complicate it and deal with it more honestly than that. But I think that's the coalition. I mean, the coalition is people who want to go back, people who want stability. And on the other hand, I mean, the reason why you can have all those medical radicals is because, I mean, that's their politics. It's their disaffection. They don't care about stability. They don't care about trusting institutions. They don't trust them at all. I mean, what's important is not only do some of those pseudo left-wing people who changed to the Republican side, not only do they change to the Republican side, but that's the only reason they changed. I mean, you can unironically find people who, the COVID era was their moment. That was the thing for them, that the pandemic and the vaccine and the lockdowns were so, for whatever reason, so earth-shattering to them that was their solo changing moment. And all the rest of the stuff is kind of whatever, they can change over time. Maybe they won't even. Maybe they'll just be left-wing on every other issue. But that one thing makes them so mad that they'll support Trump because he's anti-government in that way. And that's, I think, that is really I mean, it's kind of a boring observation, but really that anti-establishment versus establishment kind of feeling is really what's driving a lot of the partisanship. And it's not based on actual state power, because if it was, they wouldn't be supporting Trump. I mean, they wouldn't be supporting a guy who's this incoherent on state power. I mean, Trump will do crazy things with state power. If you truly were like worried about state power, you wouldn't support him. But it's more about this feeling of the establishment and the anti-establishment that are driving so much of politics. And I do think it really is like affect. It's really feeling and kind of like, you know, this kind of anti-politics affect that drives people in a certain direction. And that's why I would actually say that, you know, I think what that person was saying, the you know, the right winger, about left wingers becoming Trumpists, I agree with you that I wouldn't be interested in Tulsi or RFK. Those aren't really left wingers to me in any meaningful sense. They're barely liberals. I guess disaffected liberals, but they're definitely not leftists. But you can find actual leftists who were like radical Marxists or claimed to be, and became basically Trump supporters. I mean, we have to be
Absolutely, you
honest
can.
that there's a huge section of, and I think this is why I'm interested in breaking down a lot of these barriers, because there must be something about those people that is kind of reactionary and conservative, and they are able to find a coalition in the Trump world based on that. And we have to find whatever the counter coalition to that is going to be. I don't think it can be this kind of blind liberalism. And to be honest with you, what I imagine, okay, my dream is that the neocons and MSNBC and actual Marxists can have more dialogue with each other. I think they have more similarity at this moment than you know, actual Marxists do with those Marxists who became Trumpists or RFK or whoever. I think that someone like you can legitimately have more dialogue with, you know, the, you know, oldest, whitest ex-Republican that exists on MSNBC. I mean, I think you can, and I think that I represent kind of that, you know, that converging interest, which is that there really is a desire to maintain this, I don't know, this tradition of anti-authoritarianism, this tradition of, I don't know, intellectualism, because there is this very anti-intellectualism on the right, and that's what I'm interested in. I think we have to make these really strange alliances. I mean, that's really what I'm talking about. I mean, we have to make strange alliances. We have to talk about these things, and it makes me sad that Marxists don't seem willing to do that, because liberals seem too compromised to them. And I would just say, listen, I mean, you have to find the right liberals, and you have to realize that, I mean, most people aren't really that ideologically committed to begin with, and so you might as well talk to liberals, but not the liberals you might think. You know, not necessarily the liberals who are just like radical progressives. Those might not be the people who are most amenable to your position, because your position isn't like exciting. It doesn't animate that kind of impulse, right? And so yeah, I think that's kind of the weird confusion that people have to deal with. I mean, I actually, on my show, I spoke with a never Trumper Republican, and I
Mhm.
told him about Marxism. I told him about, you know, Louis Bonaparte and Bonapartism and the critique of class, and he was like interested in it. He was very receptive to it. He was interested in it, and I think that's real. I think that's a real thing, is that we can have dialogue among those of us who are interested in resuscitating an actual thoughtful tradition, and I think it's necessary. Otherwise, to be honest with you, the reason some people might say, like, you know, you want to hold on to this tradition, whatever it is, you want to have dialogue among leftists and never Trumpers and all this, you want to do this. The reason is because honestly, I think the alternative is just pure tribalism. I think it really is going to become affect tribalism, where people sort into their personal camps based on their personal beliefs and their families, and they're just going to start hurting each other. And to be honest with you, when I look at like the Charlie Kirk assassination, I don't see that as having anything to do with ideology. I see that as politics becoming so unapproachable that people resort to their personal affect, their personal families, their personal feelings. That's honestly what I see. Um, yeah.
Well, I mean, I hate to tell you, but most terrorism actually comes from that. You know, like we could talk about the aestheticization of ideology as another you know, theoretical thing going on back to Ben Hameen on where that comes from. But when I lived amongst a lot more radicals, like, and I don't mean radicals in the sense of like I say crazy shit on X. I mean, when I was in Egypt and I knew people who had fought, you know, who'd done street violence against other people,
Yeah.
who had sided with governments that put their oppositions in jail and then had to sit at the table with them afterwards.
Yeah.
The biggest thing that moved people to violence that actually was lethal tended to be frankly personal. Whereas ideological violence is real. I mean, it happens. But one, for most things, it's aimed at either soft targets or people closer to your side. Like, statistically speaking, if you were a leftist in the 70s and you got killed and it wasn't by some local cops because the COINTELPRO turned your case over to local cops and they got gun heavy, right? Which is actually probably the number one way American leftists were killed. And even then you're only dealing with a few hundred. It's probably more than people realize, but it's not astronomical at all.
Right.
The people who are most likely to kill you were other leftists, like just straight up. Like we murdered each other in the 60s and 70s. And places where there was, I mean, like if you think about the aftermath of the Vietnam War in Cambodia, that's a Marxist-Leninist party fighting another Marxist-Leninist party with two Marxist-Leninist megastates having proxy wars.
Yeah.
In that conflict.
Yeah.
Which bled over to like Latin America and even in the States. And it occasionally became violent. And it occasionally produced a lot of neoconservatives, a lot of the old neoconservatives, like David Horowitz. David Horowitz was a Maoist who became convinced that during the contestation in the Sino-Soviet split, that one of his friends was killed by the Black Panthers. Like that's his origin story.
Yeah.
Okay. We don't know if one of his friends was killed by the Black Panthers. Like it's never been proven one way or the other. But that's his pivot turn. Robert Reich was a Maoist. I know people don't. I mean, people talk about Van Jones, but Robert Reich, good old liberal, was a Maoist who had ties to Bavavakian's Revolutionary Communist Party through the SDS, and because of some of the events around the SDS, he became a kind of standard liberal and got integrated into the Clinton, orbit and all that. I bring this up because, like, I think one thing you have to reckon with, though, when it comes to Marxist in particular, maybe not all socialist leftists, but when it comes to Marxist in particular, we have two ways in which we think this can go as far as us and institutions. We can take them over, or we can destroy them and build them anew. And I guess there's the third option after Deleuze and Guattari, the French theorist that led to accelerationism, is we can let them destroy themselves and take them over. Now, I think the third option is objectively insane. Historically, it's ended in fascism.
Right.
If you remember, to the relatively unpopular social democrats in the Weimar Republic, what the communists used to say was, after the Nazis, us. So, we'll, and only in the very, very, very late when a lot of the Social Democratic Party was in exile, and when in France and Italy during the Popular Front, which I actually am kind of a skeptic of, but I'm going to paint the heroic version of the story here. Did you see some people finally going like, okay, we have to save some of the Social Democrats. We can't let them be annihilated. They are our allies. It also happened very late with the Social Democrats. The Social Democrats became more and more rabidly anti-communist until 1929. And by that point, they were almost all liquidated. And these are things to think about when it comes to today. So I don't know if you know what I talk in Marxistese sometimes, and so having someone like you on the show is actually good because it makes me not do that. But in the historical traditions, there are kind of three or four basic Marxist orientations towards liberals. There's what we call ultra-leftism, which is you make no truck with them at all. Now, there's more involved with ultra-leftism historically, and most of what we would call today ultra-left wouldn't meet that criterion, but I'm just going to keep this here. There is a kind of ultra-left adjacent position but it was also maintained by the Comintern, the group, the Communist International, during the Stalin period until 1936. And this is called the United Front from below, but no United Front from above. What that meant was you could join with liberals and unions and civic associations, but you couldn't join with them in political parties or sit in a government with them. All right. Now, I'm not worried about Marxists sitting in a government anytime real soon, so maybe this is irrelevant. There's then the classical United Front, which you cannot sit in a government with liberals, but you could empower them to beat reactionary forces by selective obstruction. All right. So there'd be times where we're not going to fuck with the liberals on this. We'll let them do their thing.
Right.
And then there'd be times where we would be like, oh, we're not going to let you do that. We're going to mess up your vote. Then there's a popular front, which is where you actually join them outright. One of the historical reasons why it's hard to convince Marxists to do that is because it was the mechanism by which the second or third or fourth, depending on how you're counting, Red Scare in the 1950s was able to purge all the Marxists. Because it's actually true what the Birchers said about the Democratic Party. They were full of communists during the end of World War II because we were in a military alliance with the Soviet Union. And the Popular Front said, okay, communists, you can work with them. You can work with the FDR administration. And at the state level under Truman, and then at the federal level under Eisenhower, they were purged. And in so much that there's any memory from communists about liberals at all, because admittedly, the New Left kind of erases all this history. The way the New Left emerged, it kind of just becomes, it's weird. Americans don't really understand this history. Even American leftists, the 5% that might identify as Marxists, they don't really grok this either.
Yeah.
Is that we get purged from the AFL and CAO, we get kicked out of the Democratic Party, and then we get blacklisted from civil society. And we didn't get killed like in many other places, so there's that. I mean, well, most of us didn't. There was a few killings, but most of us didn't get killed. And it led to a couple of things. It led to the New Left. It led to communists hanging out in universities. It also led to this weird tendency for communists to correlate on these coastal cities, but actually the New Left Marxists were actually in the Midwest. I could explain that to you, but it takes a long time. But this historical memory is part of why we just don't trust liberals. There is a sense that we've been betrayed by you so many times. Why should we trust you again? After the fall of the Soviet Union in 1992, I think a lot of people were like, well, liberals are the only game in town. But then the liberalism that was dominant, at that time period, that's Blair, that's Clinton, that's the Atari Democrats becoming the DNC, and the DLC, and all that. It's hard for any of us to be, particularly those of us who are over 25, to feel good about that. So I guess part of the problem is we still have two options. If you see the DSAs are one of the options. We'll work with the Democrats. We'll even join their party, but we eventually want to split it into two different parties. And the fact is, I've always said, okay, you want to do that, but why would you tell people that? Because if they know that, they're never going to give you any power, because they know what you want to do. So I guess my question is to you is there might need to be coalitions, I'm a United Frontist myself. I have no problem being we should leave the liberals alone on this one, or and there are Marxists you've had on who are basically popular frontists, or even so much, maybe even beyond that. I mean, Matt McManus is more than a popular frontist. He basically thinks that the socialist tradition and the liberal tradition should re-merge together.
Right.
And then there's United Frontists, but right now, and I think this is interesting because this is even true for Marxist Leninists who historically have been popular front people. there's like no trust of the Democratic Party, and a lot of us feel like we need to get rid of them. But there is a lot of influence of identitarian left liberalism. So I guess this brings me to another question. I think a lot of the problems of identity, marginalization of race and gender are very real and are not just subsets of the class problem, but they are separate, or they're related, but not subsumed by. Actually, it's what I'd actually say. They're not separate. But that a lot of ways that what we might call the radical liberals today, rad libs, or Marxists, we often call them shit libs, that we see them as engaged in a pseudo radical project that is largely academic and that has had a disproportionate effect on liberal talking points, but no effect on liberal policy. Like none, like literally none. There was some attempt to with DEI, but not really. Reparations, no one was took that seriously. I mean, there's just a lot of stuff that was floated around during the first Trump administration by progressives that I don't even think they really believed they were going to do. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe a lot of them did, but I don't really think like they would make moral arguments for reparations. Some of them might even agree with morally, but I'm like, but it's not a political project. Like this is not there. What role do you think that played? Because I know a lot of like social democratic types who'd be very willing to get on the kind of coalition you're proposing more than me. Who think that's the reason why we can't. Like, and I find that interesting because I'm like, I don't even think that's a dominant posture in the Democratic Party anymore. But what do you make of that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that I was kind of hinting at that earlier, that I think I'm more interested in reaching full-on leftists than those kinds of radical liberals. Because I think their beliefs are frankly just kind of underdeveloped and incoherent. And I think a lot of people get confused and they think like that I'm some kind of progressive liberal because I must be if I'm talking to leftists. But that's not the case at all. I mean, I sympathize with a lot of progressive liberal positions for sure. I'm not like completely anti that, but I'm not one of those people. I mean, I'm not interested in radical, like I think race politics is real. I think we should talk about race, but like a lot of these radical progressivisms just are incoherent, just go way too far. And frankly, I think they're unreachable because they are so based on, I think, the degradation of politics. They're so anti-political. They're so much based on this like affect and anti-politics that I don't really think you can reach them. I mean, they just have their personal issues. It's really the mirror of the people who got so traumatized by the vaccine and the lockdown that they became Republicans. It's really the mirror of that, right? I mean, people who are Democrats or call themselves Marxists based on third worldism or something like that, the worst versions of it are just not like coherent, right? I mean, those people are, I just don't think they're serious. I don't think you can really work with them. At some point you'll have to, but you just can't base a project off of that, I think. And so I think I
would agree with you. I think about the people that during Gaza were like, well, if the Native Americans rose up and had to kill us all, that I would just like, I'd hide under the rock, but I'd let it happen. And I'm like, in what world do you think that 98% are okay? Even let's even factor out Black people. So let's say 19% of the population is going to be able to just kill all of the remaining 45 and to deport the rest to some vague place. Like to me, that's not a political vision. That's a revenge fantasy.
Yeah, exactly.
Settler colonialism is something I think is very real. And I don't want to mock it, but like even the people I know involved in the indigenous tribes who are into land back, they don't talk that way.
Yeah.
Like,
yeah, I bet. Yeah.
I'm not saying nobody does, but most of them do not. That's not what they mean. And then furthermore, I look at the situation of both the voting patterns on the reservations, which, with the exception of the Dene or the Navajo Nation, are actually very conservative because rural politics in those areas. And B, that vision hasn't fixed anything on the res. It hasn't given, indigenous people any more of their treaty rights back. It hasn't given them more representation in any form of a participatory government. It hasn't even got them plumbing. And so, I'm like, well, who's asking you to do that? Because even indigenous people don't really seem to be. And so that seems to me to be totally performative. It's not politics. It's a moral posture, and one that's frankly delusional, even if it's based off of real historical concerns. I don't even like calling that land back. I know a lot of leftists will attack land back as being that. But that's when I've talked to like indigenous leaders and stuff on my show. That's not what they say. So it's just an interesting problem. So what do you deal with that? Like, I think one of the things I want to ask you, and I've been hinting at anti-politics, but what do you think anti-politics is? There's a lot of people. There's a few people on the left, some of whom became basically Trumpists, actually.
Yeah.
I think of Dr. Tad Teaser from Australia, who's at least very soft on Trump. But that used to be called anti-political Marxism. But what do you think anti-politics is, and why do you think it's so dominant right now amongst certain kinds of progressives and certain kinds of leftists? Because to me, I worry about it a lot, because I just like, I look at Gen Z and people are like, oh, Gen Z's, the predictions about Gen Z as a cohort, particularly the male variety, on how progressive or regressive they are. That narrative has shifted 180 degrees in less than 2 years.
Yeah.
And I suspect it'll shift again, because we're seeing Gen Z revolts against, a lot of these quasi-Bonapartist governments too. And if you look at how unstable like Trump support is amongst even identified Republicans under 30, it doesn't line up to either narrative at all. But there's got to be something driving that. That's just not a political vision. So, like, what do you see going on there? You're closer to that generation to me.
Kind of, not that much, but I mean, I want to make like three big points. So there's a lot here, but first of all, I want to actually I'll leave that for last, because it's like the most different. But on the generation question, I honestly feel that, I mean, and first of all, I'm not very familiar with my generation. I mean, I'm looking at them from the outside for the most part. I haven't really known people from my generation for a long time. So that's an unfortunate circumstance. But my feeling would be that most generations are kind of like this. I think if you go back 10 or 15 years ago, millennials were completely incoherently defined. I mean, millennials were like a punching bag. They were all sorts of different things. Now that time has passed, I think now you can start to actually put a finger on what the millennials are, and you can start to talk about that, right? I think Gen Z is very much in the same situation, where it's going to take another 10 years to have any idea of what Gen Z is. I think they're too young, too confused, and we're too biased in the way we look at them at the moment to really have a solid handle. But if I had to make any prediction, really the defining, and this leads into the next point, really the defining thing about Gen Z will probably be, even in retrospect, Trump, in the sense that Trump really opens up at least it makes one feel as if Trump opens up the political horizon so much that you might as well become a Nazi, or you might as well become like a Leninist, Maoist. I mean, it opens up that political horizon. But it really is this kind of anti-politics. And yeah, I mean, anti-politics for me, I'm wary of treating it like a contemporary phenomenon. Like, oh, everyone's just so modern technology and modern people, they're just anti-politics. And I'm really wary of analyzing things in that way. I think the first thing you have to do is look at historical analogs and even philosophical ideas. And really, I think I'm really interested in Nietzsche. And I think the most interesting idea of Nietzsche for me is his ideas of psychology and affect, and how they and how, so much of what we do is really deceptive to ourselves, especially. And I think that's kind of how I see anti-politics. I think anti-politics is really a psychological problem of self-deception, and an inability to kind of understand what your goals are, what your goals should be, or weigh your goals appropriately. We can even see it in kind of Marxist theory. We can see in a version of this when we talk about, um, misapprehension, a lack of class consciousness. Marxists are very aware of the fact that a lot of rural people or workers are very conservative or reactionary. Obviously,
Mhm.
this is a problem that Marxists have had to deal with for a long time. And the way it's talked about is that there is some kind of delusion there, or some kind of lack of information, some kind of an illusion that you have to work with. And I think that's really just true of kind of the human per se. I think it's a very human problem. And this is why I'm interested in philosophy, is because I really think we have to ask this question also of like, what is the human subject? What kind of delusions are we dealing with? How can we overcome them? How does this translate into politics? And that's why when I talk about politics, I just have such a huge preference for people who are honest, or what I perceive to be honest, people who are radically self-critical and very honest about kind of how they reach their positions, and their own incoherence, and they're honest about that. And that's one of the things I dislike the most about these ultra left radicals that exist today, or the Trumpists. I mean, these people, to me, their biggest problem is their lack of honesty, and their lack of like kind of awareness. And I think that is really what defines them, uh, you know, outside of their ideology. And yeah, so I guess, I mean, these are just kind of like gestures and hints at an answer, but I really do think anti-politics is this kind of psychological deep problem. And I don't think it's like a modern society problem, although it might be the case that, that's making it worse, or that's making it manifest in a particular way. But I don't think we should just pass it off as it's a modern problem, because I think that makes you kind of, I think what you're doing, that you're kind of throwing your hands up, and you're just kind of like, let's forget about all human history. We have no memory. We have no history. And I think you're putting yourself in a very hopeless position. So I don't think you should do that. I think you have to look at history, and we do have to deal with this problem. But yeah, I mean, I guess that's the best I can do on that. But the last thing I wanted to say, the last point I wanted to make, is I wanted to return to what you said earlier about, Marxists don't want to ally with liberals because they get
Mhm.
betrayed. And yeah, I mean, I've thought about this a lot. I've thought about, I'm coming in here and I'm like, hey guys, let's all be friends. And I realized that everyone's kind of aware on my side and on your side that at a certain point, like, our differences are going to exist. I mean, you can't have people who believe in like liberal capitalism and people who believe in like a revolutionary society of some kind. You can't have those people permanently on the same side. At some point that has to come up. If they are on the same side, it's because there is such an enormous enemy on the other side they're fighting, or something like that. I guess my answer to that right now, and it's probably not satisfying to a lot of leftists, but it's basically that our historical experience tells us that neither leftism nor liberalism is very coherent. And so I think trying to define allies based on what happened in the past is basically irrelevant. We really need to reconstruct from scratch what these things are. And if you're working with a liberal political party, like for example, I don't think you have to work with the Democrats, because the Democrats have shown themselves to be essentially grasping onto the past in such a way that you can't really honestly grapple with issues with them, and so that's fine. But when it comes to someone like myself, who is somewhat of a committed liberal but is also trying to find the coherence of that ideology, um, I guess what I would ask for is more honesty from leftists about the incoherence of their ideology. And I would say we have to deal with that first. We have to deal with that first before we can even imagine what the dynamics would look like in the future. Um, because I just don't
Well,
think you can replicate. I think what happened in the past made sense because leftists had said, you know what, we want to do a revolution. We think we can do a revolution, and that ended up being a certain thing. And liberals had said, listen, we're fighting the Soviet Union. We have to get these people out of our society. They're going to undermine it from within. And those problems can be replicated in kind, but I think it would be, shallow or illegitimate if we just assumed that it would take place in exactly that form when we haven't even figured out like what we believe in, really. I mean, I think we have to have real political movements before we ask that question.
well, I would. I mean, like, look, I think the LARPing of the middle of the 20th century is one of the most tired things that everyone's doing right now. I think that's true for the Democrats. I think it's true for the Democratic Socialists, actually, even though they're a little bit less blatant about it. I
Yeah.
very much think it's through for Marxist Leninists to somehow think that they can have a long march with a protracted peasants' war in the United States, where there literally are no peasants. Um, are that they hope the third world, regardless of the economic analysis of third worldism, the idea that the most dominated and fractured classes of the modern world are going to liberate everybody and get revenge. That to me is an eschatological fantasy, even if you believe in some of the analysis about what's happening to the third world and why, we need a more just war towards them, and why national developmentalism in the core would never be good enough, and why we need anti-imperialism. I would agree with all those things, actually. But I just think that the most extreme forms of third worldism, which I don't know how many people actually believe. I know some people who do. Just seem to me to be like wish casting, and they're also very uncharitable towards the possibility of liberation in your own society. You just basically are saying, I mean, to me, it's not just you're giving up on liberals, you're giving up on the left pretty much everywhere else. Tut and I, of the people that you've talked to, Tut and I are probably the closest, although Tut would probably say that I have ultra leftist tendencies, and I would probably say he has Bonapartist tendencies, but he would not like that. One thing I would say about that, and I say this because Tut's probably, like I said, one of the closest people that you've had on there. I also like Mac McManus a lot. I have a wary appreciation for Chris Catrone. He's one of the people who taught me indirectly, but it's a wary appreciation. But I think one of the things that you'll see is, even in this relatively small sample size of the Marxist left, and it's a small sample size, the positions are wildly deviant from each other. Yeah. Like extremely so. And one of the things I've been trying to do is get the left to look at itself and look at its history more coherently, and then also look at the other side. Because I'll tell you, from my perspective, I talk a lot about tailism and how you don't tail liberals and you don't tail conservatives and you don't pretend to care about the cultural stuff. But I actually do think you have to appeal to relatively conservative-minded working class people, and you have to somehow you need the skills, if for no other reason than a lot of professional liberals, to be able to stand up to a very decadent bourgeoisie. And one of the things that is a difference between Trump 1 and Trump 2 is it was very clear that capitalists were very leery about Trump 1. And even if they're still leery about Trump 2, they aren't making that known, right? Yeah. And it's also very clear that and this is an economic thing, but the economic policies of Obama, particularly the way he handled the bailout, which led to development of things like BlackRock, and led to SpaceX. It actually is a direct contributor to both Peter Thiel and Elon Musk being some of the richest people in our economy, because of the way they structured quantitative easing and focused on tech in a particular way, and allowed those sectors to be unprofitable for a very long period of time, longer than capitalism would normally allow, and protected venture capital investments in there, that they created their own monsters, Yeah, and it's true that like Thiel and Mark Andreessen were never really Democrats. I don't know about Elon Musk. He may have actually believed that shit at one time. Probably not, but I really don't know. But someone like Bezos and Zuckerberg, they seem to have known where their bread was buttered, and they've very much shifted sides. And I think that puts liberalism in a really strange place, because also, if we look economically, nobody has a good way to restart this economy if the AI if the AI does not become profitable outside of data centers and chips, because otherwise you have a bubble. It will eventually break, and when it breaks, it's going to spill out upon onto everything, and like in a way that won't even mirror uh, the Great Depression. I mean, one of the things that we have to like ask ourselves right now is like right now we have an economy where even consumer spending is only supported by like 10% of the population in the upper 10%. Liberalism is not supposed to produce that. I mean, you know, it's not supposed to produce an even more unequal society than feudalism.
Sure.
And one without any means of subsistence for a lot of people. I mean, it literally would be, you know, Peter Thiel's like both calling people who critique him the Antichrist and calling anyone who critiques AI the Antichrist, while also saying that maybe we just need to accept that the human race is over and that the robots are going to rule, and we're going to have to give all our power and everything up for that on like a sacrifice of like, I don't know, 8 billion people for a few rich dudes. Like, how do you deal with that? I mean, that's, you know, if you want to talk about something you should be able to get liberals to get behind fighting, you know, that seems like it's easy. And yet there's no political force in a lot of the English speaking world for that to really fight that. It doesn't seem to exist right now.
Yeah, I mean, the issue of capitalism is obviously something that I have to deal with it. I have less strong opinions on it because I just feel like I have to have such a like deeper understanding of like the economy and the history of it that I just don't feel like it's my strongest suit, but it is something that I have to deal with. And yeah, I mean, one of the things that scared me about Trump too was how quickly that the billionaires just like flip flopped. I mean, it really reveals, I think, very transparently that these are very weak people. Like I just have like absolutely no respect for like these kinds of people. It's not that they just are so weak and spineless. They're so beneath politics. They're kind of anti-politics in their own way. That they can just flip on a dime based on, you know, affect. And I think the scariest part is that it's not even like a lot of people will accuse them of, well, they're just following their interests. I think the scariest thing is how genuine it probably is. I think it is genuine in the sense that these kinds of people in the state of our politics don't even know that they're being hypocritical. They're just like, oh yeah, I mean, Trump is good for America. Obama made me feel like he was good for America. Let's go. Like I think we really have to deal with what happens when politics is so degraded that all of these important people, they can be this weak and spineless and incoherent. And you know, as far as like their influence, I mean, it's complicated. I have always been skeptical of the idea. And this is kind of a naive leftist view. I don't think it's a real leftist view, but you know, kind of the idea that money controls everything is just so common and just so frustrating to me. I've always been interested in state power and politics and political organization. And to me, it seems obvious that the state has so much influence over the economy and the people in it that, you know, it's a more complicated thing. It's more like the state creates the economy and the economy reciprocally controls the state in a way that the state allowed to take place. And it's some kind of problem there. And I think you have to deal with that. And I honestly don't know how you deal with that. I mean, this is why I think people like, you know, Peter Thiel or these billionaires are our enemies. It's because again, they're wearing masks. They're deluded. They're not truly apprehending what politics is. And that's why I think we need to have an alliance or some sort of dialogue between people who see through that, because it's just so incoherent. I mean, it's so deeply incoherent. I just can't even like fathom how like, you know, it can't be the case that we have these people who have such an elementary like view of politics and they go on Joe Rogan and they're like lecturing about political history that they don't understand, and they're giving like genuinely high school level opinions. And that just can't be the case. That just can't be like there has to, this is a problem. Like this is a problem for your state. If your state is producing this kind of power, there's a problem. If your economic system is producing this, I mean, you have to figure out like, can it be controlled? What does it mean? What is it? I mean, you have to figure these questions out. And I just feel like genuinely for every one of these questions, I just feel like there isn't a genuine grappling with them. You know, I'm frustrated when I watch CNN because they don't ask these questions. Like if you watch CNN, they're like, whatever, we like innovation, I guess. We just don't like Trump because he goes too far. And it's just very incoherent. They won't stand on a principled understanding of these issues. But at the same time, leftists won't. Leftists will just kind of say, yeah, billionaires are evil, they're bad people. And I'm sorry, but that's not going to get anywhere. Like, that's not going to solve any problems. It's just truly not. And
I find that weird, actually. I mean, I find it weird for a bunch. Yes, we think that billionaires are a structurally inhibited contradictory force historically. Actually, you know, we didn't talk much about billionaires as just evil because we don't think the problem is just greed. We don't think it's a moral, or I shouldn't say we, like historically, Marxists have not thought this problem was a moral problem because we actually thought that the accumulation that capitalist greed, and I'm putting that in quotation marks to people listening, enabled, if it could be reappropriated and expropriated from its source and spread back to society, would actually allow us to do things that we've never been historically able to do, because otherwise we realize that our schemas would take us back to the fucking Bronze Age at best. We know that. Like, we're not stupid.
Yeah.
And so, like, whether or not these billionaires are good or bad, I think a lot of this particular grasp of billionaires are bad, but it's not because it's not just because they're billionaires. And for me, I mean, I'm going to just, you know, you might be uncomfortable with this. I think this is because of the detente between progressive moralist and socialist have kind of fallen apart since actually, because for such a long time, we've both been called socialists and only one of us are. That there's a lot of Marxists who've internalized these kind of dialogues too. And I'm just like, it doesn't matter if these are good people or bad people. Like, it's not, that's not the point. I mean, this particular batch seems particularly bad, right? But for me, even that's not because of their morality. It's because of a particular set of shitty incentive structures. And yes, like, I think Peter Thiel is like a Batman villain. But nonetheless, I mean, you're talking about a guy who's literally like, we need to drink the blood of babies, and then like, I'm okay with ending the world to prop up my little AI project. But most of them aren't that blatant. Most of them aren't that, you know, crass. And you know, I think one of the things that's interesting to me about this, you know, we talk about the Democrats a lot. I've actually argued that the Democrats have become the small c conservative party, and that they're trying to conserve something of the past, whereas like they're a liberal party, but they're a conservative liberal party now because they don't really have a positive agenda. I mean, parts of them do, like the Green New Deal and all this, but like if you look at what they actually do, they don't. You know, their primary goal right now, if you look at the abundance people, seems to be to win portions of the tech billionaires back to a slightly less brutal form of what's going on now. It's like, you know, neoliberalism with a human AI face. There's the chorus people who seem to be good at anti-Trumpism, but that's it. They're not concerned about presenting a positive vision after Trump. And I do think that is a strategic mistake that you see in most of the coalitions in liberal spheres, is like they don't have there is no positive vision. I mean, this is also true for the GOP. Once Trump is gone, it's going to be a low-key civil war. Like if you think about the different factions, even in the current form of the Trumpist coalition, they're going to turn. We're already seeing some of them turn on each other. Laura Loomer and Marjorie Taylor Greene, for example. Besnett and what's his face? The other economic advisor.
Lutnick.
Yeah, Lutnick. There's tensions between them. There was very clearly tensions between them and Doge. It's also clear that despite all the appearance of solidarity, Hegseth, from some stuff we know that have been linked to the Minneapolis Tribune because they won't stop using Signal, is actually a little scared about the extent that which Steve Miller wants to push things about using the military as a form of police. Like, you know, like even Hegseth is a little afraid of that.
Interesting.
Yeah, that came out because they were using it on Signal, and somebody took a picture of it, of the phone on the Signal chat at a funeral. Like, it's just like, man, you guys are not. If some random reporter in Minnesota can do it, guess who else can do it? But anyway, I do think this kind of leads us to a problem, though. I mean, I think a problem for liberals in America is going to be, what do you do after this? Because if you just think you can return to a status quo, if you look at what Biden did, right? Biden tried to rationalize and make slightly more progressive a bunch of policies that were really introduced in Trump run. An attempt at reindustrialization. He just tried to make it more green. An attempt at infrastructure investment, which Trump has seemingly abandoned. He just doesn't care anymore. But he used to really care about it. Yeah. While Biden didn't do this particularly well, I would argue he actually maintained a whole lot of Trump 1 era immigration policies. And I find this very interesting because it just looks like you guys, I shouldn't say that like you're not a representative of the Democratic Party. And we do have to separate liberalism from the Democratic Party, which a lot of people have a hard time doing. But there's not really any animating philosophy behind this. Now, I get you. There's never been a coherent ideology on the planet, and political philosophy has always been piecemeal. I mean, like, this is absolutely true. I spent a lot of my time thinking about the cul-de-sacs in Marxism that just we have not ever worked out. And they're big. Like, what we think nation states are for. Like, there's like, that's not settled. Fundamental basic thing. We don't agree amongst ourselves and never have. And there's no textual answer to it easily either. Right? How do you incorporate people who've been subject under prior colonialism? That's not actually settled either. Like, these kinds of things are not clear. And it's I think for a long time, for Marxists, that's been okay, because let's be quite frank. Marxism after 1992, unless you were in China or Vietnam, or maybe the DPRK ? Or Cuba, was not really a live discussion in the developed world. And in the developing world, it was more about Maoism and national liberation and peasant and the abolition of the peasantry. So that puts us today in kind of a bind, because our own like, my frustration with Marxists right now is our imagination pretty much seems to be either, can we win these academic debates between each other, or can we have our 20th century back, pick the part of the 20th century you like, be it social democratic Norway or the USSR, or China in the 70s, or China in the 80s, or China in the 90s, like, which of those things do you want? And the problem I have is that from a Marxist perspective, the material conditions for all of that don't exist. That we're in a different set of material and social conditions. Our relations are different. The factory models don't apply anymore. There is no peasantry. There more and more people are proletarianized from our perspective, meaning that they are wage earners. Less and less people, however, work in the productive sectors of the economy anywhere, not just here. It's all over. Like, and so our concerns are also fragmented and shot. Right. So I agree with you on this honesty thing. The thing is, though, if I'm talking to a liberal, I have to put my liberal hat on. I have to remind myself of liberal institutions. And like, because you and I, if I was talking pure Marx and you were talking pure liberal, we just talk past each other. We have a completely different epistemic explanation for why things are the way they are. Mm-hmm. Like, and so, I mean, the dialogue that you want is hard because it's not just a matter of us not trusting each other because of historical reasons. Even if we drop that, we don't talk the same way. Like, when we get into our theoretical frameworks, they're not totally incompatible, we all come out of 18th century liberalism somehow, but we're not compatible either. Like the way we talk about, like if you put me in a room with Ezra Klein, God forbid, that would be weird. But I feel like we just start yelling at each other. I mean, he would be much more, demure about it and have his nice beard and whatever. But and he'd sound really intelligent until I thought about what he said. But we would be talking past each other all day, like just straight past each other. And if anything, it's easier for me to understand him than for him to understand me.
Yeah, probably. Yeah, for
sure. And so, like, that's a big problem to this dialogue right now. One of the things that I've been really thinking about is like, okay, even if I don't want to sit in government, I don't want my people sitting in government with your people. Like, let's be frank, we're not even close to that happening. Like, so how do I even get this dialogue where I can understand your concerns and you can understand mine? And that's what I liked about your show, actually, because I do think that's a huge problem right now. Because one of the things that I think is not, I agree with you, though, a lot of the things we see on the internet they're not new because they're new. They're new because the internet makes them easier and more ubiquitous, right? Like, so Marxists have always been niched off, right? If anything, the internet makes it where we're less niched off. But you can be in a group and talk to hundreds of, even thousands of people. You might even have like 10, 20,000 followers on Twitter and still not realize that despite that massive amount of following, you are in a super niche part of society, because that is an aggregated number from all over the planet, right? From a population of like 8 billion.
Yeah.
So no one has you really can't limit yourself to who you're talking to unless you have a very real world instantiated like career. And I mean, one of the things I talk about in regards to like a lot of Marxist and left media figures is they don't like they don't have like a normal job. Unfortunately, it's also true for a lot of Gen Z for other reasons. And so it does make this ability to talk to each other or understand each other's epistemic or moral assumptions a lot harder to do. Do you have an answer? I mean, I know that's part of your whole project. I mean, that's why I'm interested in your project. But like, do you have an answer to that? Because Marxists talking to other Marxists does not make new Marxists very often. Like,
yeah, exactly. Yeah. I mean, I've brought up this problem multiple times. Like the different language problem is really frustrating because I mean, I really had to put myself out. I mean, just privately, I really had to like intentionally make the effort to learn the language of Marxists to, figure out like who are these thinkers they're talking about, how do they use these words, and I like doing that. I like understanding different groups of people of all kinds, so that comes very naturally to me. But obviously, I mean, there's two problems with that. One is that it requires the other side to do that for me to, kind of be open to dialoguing with me and using my language. And I do think on average, like Marxists are probably better at dialoguing with liberals than the reverse, just because they're so,
we live in a society full of liberals.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Right. Yeah. I mean, but the other problem is that, which you're kind of posing is, I mean, how do you make this like a broader thing that happens, outside of my one little case here? And I don't know. I mean, I think that really everyone has to make an effort to change the way that they deal with these things. I think everyone has to be more willing to have conversation, but have conversation in a way that is honest about your differences. I don't think there's that much value in, Ezra Klein having on Ben Shapiro and them just kind of like vaguely gesturing at things that they believe. I don't really think that is dialogue, because they're not really being honest about where they come from. In some cases, because they don't know where they come from, and to some extent, because if they were honest, they wouldn't want to have the conversation anymore. And I think that's the problem, is that we need to, again, kind of be honest with ourselves and kind of, realize that we're going to have uncomfortable conversations. We're going to have to actually be honest about what we believe. And that's going to have to take a different form. I mean, one of the things that people thought would happen is that the internet would be like the public square times 100. Everyone's going to be more honest. We're going to have so many more opinions. And the internet is really actually heralded in an extreme dumbing down of discourse. People don't talk to people who disagree with them. If they do, again, they do it in a way that's very safe and doesn't actually challenge either party. People go into echo chambers and just kind of repeat the same talking points, and they become dumber, and it's not really important that your arguments are good. I mean, these are all problems. And I mean, really, my only answer is that every single person who's listening to this and who's in this space has to do something different. I mean, we have to challenge ourselves to not just engage with the other side. You have to engage in a way that is genuinely honest towards what they believe and what you believe. And that could be a super heated debate. That could be a really nice conversation. It could be anything between that. But what it has to be is honest. And a lot of the ways that we have dialogue now are not honest. I think people are holding their cards to their chest. I mean, anyone who's in the podcast space or watches podcasts knows that there's a lot of like political games being played, in the sense that, you know, we don't want to talk about the things we disagree on. We don't want to, we don't want to burn bridges and all this. And while that's an understandable impulse and an unavoidable impulse and sometimes a good impulse, I think we have to have an impulse for, I don't know, the truth, I guess. And we have to really be having these conversations and forcing ourselves and the people around us to deal with these things. I think we should be averse to people who are, on our side, who aren't open to that. I think we have to be pushing the people around us and say, I know you believe that and I agree with you, but the way you're getting there is not, you're not really dealing with all these issues. I mean, you're just kind of getting there, and you're kind of getting lucky, I guess, and you have this position for whatever reason because of your disposition, your affect. But let's like work through this. Let's actually work through this. Let's actually put everything out there. Let's actually have a dispute. And yeah, I mean, it's really hard for me to say how to do that or get people to do that, but I do think that, I mean, those are some ideas of how it has to be done. And yeah, I do think it takes engagement from everyone. I think everyone can do that in some way or contribute to that culture.
I would say, I think this might be a good place to wrap up, but I'm going to give one last question and one last statement, and we can go from there. I do think one of the reasons why I have to deal with both liberals and conservatives so much is I'm in a union. I'm in a union of teachers. And I'm in a union of teachers in a purple area in a bright red state. So, like, yes, I deal with a lot of progressives in my union, but I also deal with a lot of flaming reactionaries, often who aren't Trumpist, interestingly enough. Like, and so you learn how to shift for both class and ideological presumptions and how to model minds. And I can tell you right now, I one of the things that I think we can talk about, the psychological problem of anti-politics, that maybe we should like ponder a bit, is also just the inability to model other people's minds in ways that isn't just about getting a moral edge on them, because that doesn't even help you beat them. Like, winning a debate does not actually mean you politically beat someone. I mean, like, in fact, it almost never means that, actually. So this idea that that's how you actually win in politics, to me, seems to be like fundamentally misguided and super common. Like, at the same time, like, I think it's fundamentally misguided. We also see it all the time. And so a lot of leftists, you were talking about the leftists who became Trumpists. A lot of them thought initially, oh, we have to meet the middle class, not the middle class, the working class, although who they define as working class and who I define as working class, it's a little bit sketchy. Yeah. But the working class, where they are, let's pretend to care about those social values. And one of the things that I see with that over and over again is, if you tell people like that, you are more likely to become like them than they are to become like you.
Yeah.
Whereas if I just go out to a normie religious conservative, I mean, there are certain kinds of Trumpists. I'm not trying to win over the leadership of the GOP. That won't happen. Like, in fact, I kind of think you have to at least have a soft ideological Cold War with them, no matter what. Like, and that's if things are relatively peaceful, even. But when it comes to like the average conservative person that I meet, I am not out to alienate them immediately. In fact, I'm looking for maybe the opposite of a wedge point. You know how we use cultural issues as a wedge point a lot? I mean, this is like so ubiquitous now we don't think about it. But I'm always looking for like where's the moral appeal that can bring you on board to I'm not ever trying to win people to my side. I just want them to get out of the way. If not, like I don't want them to feel like I'm a threat to them unless I really am. Like sometimes I really am, but I don't want people to feel like I'm a threat to them. When there's no reason for them to view me that way, particularly if they're working class or particularly if we have a program we have to build together. And that is hard to get people to think like. It's hard to inculcate that in a highly alienated society. One of the things that you said that's actually interesting to me, and then I'll turn this back over to you to make your final statement. But you said you are pretty alienated from people your own age, right? That you actually more engaged with. I hear that a lot, which tells me that the social functions of people your own age are like kind of falling apart. Like, so, for me, like that's a real question. That's and while that might sound anti-political, that is a political question to me. Is how do we get people socialized enough that they can then know what mutual obligation is? Because if they don't understand personal mutual obligation and personal mutual benefit, how the fuck are they going to understand political mutual benefit or political discipline? Or I mean, I might be talking about a Popular Front versus the United Front all day. If you can't even understand how to discipline yourself politically, then that's like you might theoretically understand it, but it's still meaningless to you, right? Like, so I guess what do you see in regards to that? Take as long as you want to answer it, because it's not really a question. It's just like, here's this observation. Do what you will.
Yeah, I mean, there's like two different things I want to bring in here. I mean, one is they're both different kinds of philosophy. I think one is like German idealism and Hegel, and one is Nietzsche. And I bring them in because neither one of them are leftists, but neither one of them are like easily fit into ideological camps. I mean, Hegel is probably something of a liberal, and Nietzsche is something of a anti-politics guy himself. But I mean, really, what I think there's a couple of key points, and that's that German idealism for me. One of the consistent things, and this is kind of a basic point, but one of the consistent things that Kant shows and the German idealists show is really the need for mutual recognition and subjectivity and having an awareness of like what the human subject is. And I mean, it really demonstrates that everyone is going to have a like radically different personal experience, but there is a shared character of like shared category of the human, and there has to be some mutual recognition. Otherwise, we're just at war, basically. And I think, I mean, that's obviously a liberal idea, and I would bring this in to say that this is one of the things I think is a strength of the liberal tradition, is this idea of mutual recognition of equality of like the human as a category, just the existence of a human at all that can be discussed, and the fact that among humans we need to have discourse, we need to recognize each other, we need to form groups. And it's going to have to be like in a very complicated sense. It's going to have to be a complicated relation. You're never going to find someone who just agrees with you. You're just not going to find that, and you should not try to find that. On the other hand, when Nietzsche talks about relationships and friendships, one of the things that he points out, at least by my reading, is that we don't really want compassion, and we don't really want these kind of like blind virtues that we throw out there, because they make us weaker and they're kind of self-serving at the same time. And so they're kind of like trying to do this thing that's good for everyone, but it's actually good for no one, and it's not even good for us even though we think it is. And so he does recommend kind of a version of radical honesty and holding your friends to account, and radically engaging with them. And I don't know, these are the ideas that I keep in mind, and I'm keeping in mind. And I guess it's kind of a gesture at an answer to the question of like community, because I think communities are so fractured now because there's just so much that we've taken for granted. People just kind of assume that you're going to have certain community members and you're going to get along with them, but those aren't forged on a basis of real mutual recognition, or it's just a very empty kind of status. And then this causes all kinds of problems, which is like tribal politics that is also shallow, um, or it just completely destroys the political realm altogether, which is really kind of an extension of discourse, the family, civil society, whatever. And if you don't have that, you don't have anything, and everything's broken. So yeah, I mean, I think we need to have more honesty. That if I that's one of the things I keep saying, and I just don't see anyone in the political arena or in the philosophical arena who is holding to that principle enough. And most of the people who talk about honesty, it seems to me like a self-deluded deception of what honesty means. And so, you have to have a radical perception of honesty. You have to say things that are dangerous. You have to say things, especially that are dangerous to yourself. You have to, really try to figure out what is everything around you. And I feel like if everyone was doing that, if everyone was trying to do that more often, then community and engagement would naturally arise. That would just be something that would happen. And it would be fuller. It would it would be something more. And I think what you're describing when you're working in a situation like in a union, people are forced to do that in some sense because they have a common interest, they have a goal. And so, you can talk about things more honestly because you have that common goal. But we don't really have anything that holds us in common anymore as a society. And so if you don't have anything in common with me, I can just like throw you to the side. And yeah, I don't know. It's just I think there's an incoherence, there's an impoverishment of philosophy and politics. And I would harshly advocate for a re-enrichment of all those intellectual fields. And for normal people who, don't have an interest in that or don't have time for that, they can benefit from it too. I mean, it's not like these just pass over them. I mean, there's ways to, engage in this way without, reading every philosophy book ever written. I mean, you can really gain something from this. I mean, there's truth to the idea that like Kant and the German idealists, they were like, they were waging war on behalf of the common man against the scholars, right? I mean, they were making points that were supposed to be common truths that everyone can kind of intuitively understand, that for whatever reason we've lost. And yeah, I don't know. I mean, everything I'm saying now is kind of incoherent, but I just hope that people latch on to the idea of honesty, mutual recognition, engagement, and looking around for traits in people that they might not seem like they would agree with you, but in those deeper ways you can find common ground with them. And we really have to transcend that, because otherwise I'm like you, I'm taking the black pill otherwise, because otherwise everything is shallow and kind of accounted for and kind of a mathematical game. And so I think we have to do that on that basis. But
Yeah. Well, thank you for coming on. I will link to both your audio and your YouTube podcast, as you're part of this grand new tradition of young people watching podcasts on YouTube that I participate in and don't understand. Nonetheless, good on them. So they'll find that in the show notes, and I wish you luck on your project, and you'll probably hear from me again sometime, and we'll have a more specific topic to talk about. Thank you so much.
yeah, I really appreciate you having me on.
All right.